We're this close to crowning a new NBA champion, and with the action heating up on the court, it's even hotter at DraftKings Sportsbook, an official sports betting partner of the NBA. And DraftKings Sportsbook has you covered every step of the way with same-game parlays, live betting, odds boosts, and so much more. Don't miss out as the NBA postseason winds down. The Celtics and Mavericks have tipped off. Make sure you get involved in the action. Download the DraftKings Sportsbook app now and use code HOOPS. That's code HOOPS, HOOPS, for new customers to get $150 in bonus bets when you bet just $5. Only on DraftKings. The crown is yours. All right, welcome to Hoops Tonight here at The Volume. This NBA Finals Game 1 Instant Reaction is brought to you by Chase Freedom Unlimited. How do you cash back? All right, so the Boston Celtics jump all over Dallas, have a little bit of a brain-dead stretch there in the middle that kind of made it interesting for a few minutes, but then they re-engage, reassert themselves, take control, and Game 1 goes to Boston. We have the great Colin Cowherd here to join us to break it all down. Colin, I'm gonna kick it to you and just ask you for your first impressions on the series. What did you think? I actually never heard your pick. So why don't you lead by telling me what your pick was and then whether or not tonight kind of changed your opinion at all?
I picked Boston in 6. I thought they would win. That was my DraftKings pick. I thought Jaylen Brown would play well and the Boston Celtics would win, although Kyrie didn't offer much of anything, and I thought he'd have a decent assist night. My takeaway is the small ball revolution in the NBA was really a bunch of nonsense. It was Steph Curry and Draymond Green who could play big. Everybody tried to duplicate it for about 4 years, and then everybody's like, Houston got kind of close. Size matters. And Porzingis on both ends, altering shots on the defensive end. He was the initial unicorn. 7'4", dribble, shoot. There's nothing you can do. It's why Wemby will take over the league next year at the All-Star break, is that this is a big man's game. In the NFL, Bill Parcells and the late, great George Young was a general manager for the Giants, and his whole theory was, when in doubt, just draft big guys. Like, big beats small. And in the NBA, length and size is so important. And my takeaway, if that's the Porzingis I get in the series, Dallas is in trouble. One of the things I said, they have such a mature offensive team, and they're all a little different. I mean, Tatum tonight was more assist guy than he was score guy. And I said, Tatum can have a bad night in this series, and they could win by 15. Kyrie has an off night, they get shelled. And that, to me, is the difference in the series. And I said that before I knew what I was getting with Porzingis. But I thought, the size of Porzingis, the matchup problem, Dallas came into this thing, let's feel it out. And very quickly, it's like, yeah, we're going to have to go back to the drawing board on this. And then Porzingis sits for a while. But I would start with that, is that, if I got 6 guys who could all drop 20, man, that's with the apron now, it's hard to get a third star. The league doesn't want it anymore. They want you to draft and develop. That's what the whole thing. League will pay a lot of money. They don't want you going and cherry picking stars. Boston, this is an absurdly deep offensive roster. I mean, you go look at Porzingis last year, he was the guy for Washington. You're like, well, that for a terrible team, that's an all-star level player. Derek White's a 5. Derek White's a 2 on probably 30% of the teams in the league. So I thought tonight was a little bit of what I thought, is that Dallas cannot withstand a bad Luka or Kyrie night. Boston, if you told me Tatum and Derek White didn't play well, Boston could still win. And so I just start with that, is that Porzingis' size, he was the initial unicorn. It's a problem. There's not a lot you can do. It's a big problem.
Yeah, I thought this game was a brilliant showcase of what makes Kristaps Porzingis awesome and how he elevates the ceiling of this Boston team. First of all, he's their only legitimate rim protector. Yeah. Like, Al Horford's a really interesting player and does a lot to help this team on both ends of the floor. But Kristaps Porzingis is just a mountain of a man that is really difficult to finish over at the rim. In addition to that, he brings this there are a lot of guys that can shoot in the NBA at the center position. There are very few guys at the center position that are like lasers. Like, you just can't leave them open. And one of my biggest reasons why I picked Boston is Dallas's defense is very much geared up at the rim as like a rim protection team.
That's why they were good against Minnesota. They're big.
Exactly. And they have some good perimeter defenders, but they don't have a bunch of good perimeter defenders. And so when you can really spread them out, and Lively and Gafford can't solve problems at the rim as rim protectors, it just challenges the weak points of Dallas's offense. And then the second piece of it with Porzingis that goes beyond the three-point shooting, one of the easiest ways to counter a ball screen is to switch it, because the whole point of the ball screen is you can get downhill because the guy has to chase over the top of a screen. But if you switch it, it shuts it down. But what makes Porzingis such a valuable weapon is if you switch it, you're putting your smaller player onto Porzingis, and he can just walk him down to 15 feet from the basket, and they can toss it back to him, and he can go to work. He showed it all in that game one. He was protecting the rim. He was hitting trailing threes in transition. He was hitting spot up threes in help defense situations. He was hitting pick and pop threes. He was beating switches by posting up around the elbow. It was everything that makes Porzingis great. And I'm glad you pointed this out, because everyone just accounted for Porzingis as like available and healthy. But like, it's really hard to go 30 something days without playing NBA basketball and then to walk in the NBA finals. I don't think we're like, it just was so impressive the way he immediately looked comfortable and immediately started thriving. But a big part of that is he is the guy, he's the key that solves all of the issues that Boston could have had against this Dallas defense. He unlocks it all. I was just completely blown away by him.
The other thing that jumped out, the big winner tonight too, is Joe Mazzulla. So last year he looked a little over his skis, a little bit over his skis. The Spoelstra matchup, you're like, oh boy, this is a mismatch. So they strengthen his staff. Brad Stevens, enhances the staff. Not only did he really target Dallas's liabilities defensively, like he went right after him. That's game prep. But when Dallas made a surge in the third quarter, he calls a timeout, and Boston goes on like a 14-0 run. That's coaching. That's Steve Kerr stuff. The Warriors come out of halftime and they always go on these crazy runs. That's where coaching matters. Spoelstra late, Kerr outside of halftime. And so I thought, from the opening game plan to that timeout, re-energizing his team, making a couple of changes, and just putting it away. Because you start watching Luka hit a couple. Boston had several really ugly, sloppy possessions. What you do when you get ahead by 25, you just mail in stuff. You can't stay engaged for 2 hours and 45 minutes. You just naturally get sloppy. Boston did. Luka gets him back in it. And then all of a sudden the timeout. And I thought, okay, that's the difference this year. I don't think Mazzulla calls a timeout last year. They go on a 14-0 run. First of all, they didn't have Porzingis and Drew Holiday. They're a better offensive team. Everybody feels Jaylen Brown just gets a little better every year. But that's a thing. Like, that was one of the things I worried about this with Boston. I said, I don't know if Mazzulla is a good coach. I think he's competent in the East. Is he a good coach? Tonight, I was like, that's good coaching. That's noticeably good coaching, because Jason Kidd's a much better coach than 4 years ago. So that jumped out to me. You can respond to that if you want.
Yeah. So I thought the timeout, that's an important part of coaching that doesn't really get talked about much. We talk so much about personality management and tactical approach and all these different things, but actually managing basketball games is one of the most important parts of the coach's responsibility. You have to feel when things are teetering and time when you're going to kind of step in and try to right the ship, so to speak. And Boston just had a really ugly offensive stretch there that looked very similar to a lot of the nasty offensive stretches we've seen from Boston over the course of the season. They were settling for quick shots, quick threes, isolation threes. Immediately out of that timeout, it was abundantly clear that Mazzulla was harping on the fact that they needed to get back to driving and kicking, because when they beat someone off the dribble and they pass 2 or 3 times and it's a wide open catch and shoot three, it's a really good shot with really high value. When they run up the floor in transition and Al Horford just throws a transition wing three off the side of the rim, like without running any sort of offense, that's when they can get carried away. And then I'm glad you mentioned the game plan, because I thought Missoula's game plan was brilliant to start this game. One of the specific things he did was, instead of putting Horford and Porzingis onto Gafford and Lively, their centers, he put them onto PJ Washington and Derrick Jones Jr. And what that does, which is really fascinating, and by the way, this is a shout out to Jayson Tatum, because Tatum's defensive versatility is what gives him the ability to guard centers. He's big enough to guard a center underneath the basket. But because of that, Derrick Jones Jr. and PJ Washington, when they're setting screens for Luka and rolling to the basket, they're not the same type of vertical spacers that can catch lobs like Daniel Gafford and Derek Lively. When they pop to the three-point line, they aren't very good above the break three-point shooters. And so I thought it really threw Dallas for a loop offensively, that they didn't know how to attack. And then to add another layer to it, the spacing gets all janky, because even when Luka and when PJ's rolling or Derrick Jones is rolling or popping, when Luka's getting downhill, now Tatum and Lively and Gafford and all those guys, they're just like congregated around the basket, just messing up the spacing. I thought it was a really smart defensive game plan from Missoula. I thought he managed the game really well. I thought that was a really good call out. What do you think of Jaylen Brown tonight? I thought he did an amazing job.
I picked him to be MVP of the series. So I feel like Jaylen Brown, more than any Celtic, I know exactly what I get. I get tremendous athleticism, defensive pressure. He's always engaged, plays with a little chip, like finished at the rim. He gives you about one of those a game. And I feel like every year his offensive game gets a little more refined. I don't think he's, maybe aesthetically as naturally as fluid as a Tatum, maybe not as dynamic as Ant, doesn't have just the offensive skill level of a Luka. But what he is he's just a really high IQ, intense, increasingly refined, energized player. He's strong. He's got like a D Wade body. He's strong. He'll lean on you on the defensive end. I think Jaylen's a classic sort of kind of quiet. He doesn't get chatty. He'll always be underappreciated because he doesn't ask to be stared at. He does a lot of little stuff. He's really good with his body. Really good at constantly, like, he knows he's in great shape. He knows he can wear you down. Like, Jaylen in a 7-game series is the kind of player that could get stronger. Like D Wade was like that. D Wade liked it. D Wade would be on the floor constantly, and you're like, just didn't affect him. It's almost like a football player in basketball. Like, he liked the physicality, a pitcher that's better 6th inning on. And when I watch Jaylen Brown, I just feel like I get the exact same guy, maybe in the best shape of the top 3% of the league in shape, physicality. And something, that's what I didn't get from, because I want to pivot it to this. So I write notes during games, a handful of notes. And one of the notes I put in the first half is, where are the assists? So when Kyrie's not hitting, okay, I need assists. You got to give. I felt like tonight was like Luka's turn, Kyrie's turn, Luka's turn. I thought I thought the crowd affected Kyrie. He got a little into his head. I didn't feel, if he wasn't hitting his shots, he wasn't doing anything else. Whereas when Jaylen Brown's not hitting his shots, I still feel like I get a complete player, a completely engaged, energized player. When you're a great offensive player and you're not hitting shots, I always feel like offensive players can get a little moody. They can just kind of get into their feels. I never feel that with Jaylen. So I thought Kyrie tonight just didn't forget the shooting. He was off. I didn't feel I got enough energy from Kyrie. That was my take.
No, I 100% agree. I thought in the second half, he was missing shots. But in the first half, like, he was taking bad shots. Like, he was kind of forcing the issue. He had some bad misses in that first half. He shot one off the side of the backboard. Like, he got blocked in a ball screen. Like, he was just kind of forcing the issue. I agree with you. I think some of the situation with the boos and just the intensity of the moment got to him a little bit. And you're right. Like, that's the thing. Like, to bring it back to Jaylen Brown, like, that to me is what's fascinating about Boston's roster build. You don't have Derek White before the halfway point of 2022. You don't have Drew Holiday before this year. You don't have Porzingis. Suddenly you need him to be like an offensive engine next to Tatum. And that'll shine a light on some of his shortcomings as an offensive initiator. But because there's so much offensive talent on this team, he can be kind of like pointed and shot in a very specific area where he's great. And like, I thought he ripped Luka in the backcourt twice in the first half, just with ball pressure. I thought in general, just him being a pest on Luka was just a huge pain. He was in help side, making blocks at the rim defensively. He's the one guy on the roster that's actually like a true top tier athlete. Like, Tatum's really big. And he's also like a good athlete, but like Jaylen Brown is like an actual top tier NBA athlete. So when he's allowed to focus on just being a wrecking ball, it allows him to kind of channel his strengths in his best areas and he can have success. Whereas with Kyrie, they desperately need him to be great offensively in order for him to bring the level of impact that they need from him. And as far as the assists go that you brought up, I do think a big part of that was Boston's defensive game plan. You could tell the fact that they were not able to bring Lively and Gafford into ball screens as easily. You can tell that kind of threw them for a loop. And I'm going to dig into the film and try to find some answers, but I'm really curious to see how Dallas tries to counter that over the course of the series, because you're right. It did turn into kind of your turn, my turn type of basketball with Luka and Kyrie, and they're going to have to find a way to loosen that up.
I remember seeing Jaylen Brown at Cal when the Pac-12 was a conference. And my takeaway was, God, Pac-12, he's like an athlete. You're like, this guy, is he playing on the football team? Like, this guy is just cut. And he felt a little stiff. And then Brad Stevens, the college coach, gets him, and he just gets more fluid and more fluid. And same thing with Missoula. I just feel like there's certain guys in the NBA that have made themselves into great players. I don't think coming out of Cal, I would have thought he would be this good offensively. He just makes himself like, I don't know the numbers in front of me. I feel like the first several years, he was just like 2.5, 3 points better every year. And you can see the work he put into it. You can see it from his cardio, his build. And a little bit like D Wade, he's not a naturally brilliant shooter, but he ends up with 25 a lot. And he's playing on, you know what I mean? Some guys they just end up, points, like Jalen's points are memorable. If he has 27, you remember the points. They're big points. They're points at the rim. They're steals and dunks. Something else that jumped out to me that I wrote down is that, over the course of a series, obviously Dallas will come out and have huge energy in the first quarter of game 2. They're going to come out with their hair on fire, and Dallas is going to have to match that. But there are some things like, where does Lively fit in this series? Like, I think Boston players will all take turns fitting wonderfully in this series. They'll all get their shots. Tatum will score more points in game 2. But there are a couple of Dallas players that I think you don't want to play a series and you're reacting to Boston. You want to make Boston try to react to you. And I watched a couple of times tonight, I scribbled down, like, Dallas is just reacting. But Boston's setting the tempo. Boston's doing what they want. Boston is dictating all the terms. Dallas is just kind of reacting, counter-punching. And then if Kyrie's not hitting shots when you're counter-punching, you're going to get blown out. So there are some matchups in this series. I'm like, okay, Luka and Kyrie both have to play well. I don't know what is Lively going to be an offensive player. Like, Lively can be a great rim defender. Well, if Porzingis is going to go to the perimeter and Horford's on the bench much of the series, what is Lively's role? Like, what is he going to do? So in my notes, I just kept feeling like Dallas just reacted all night. Only in that brief third quarter run, when the Celtics got sloppy, did I feel like Dallas seized control. And it was just sort of Luka.
Well, to put it simply, the reason why they're in that reacting position is because Boston's like core set game plan is clearly better than Dallas's kind of core set game plan. Like the natural way they wanted to come into this series playing heavily favors Boston. And so Dallas is going to have to figure out a way to adjust. Now, I actually think Lively is a super valuable piece for them on the defensive end because of his ability to switch out onto the perimeter and guard a little bit. He picked up some fouls in the second half where he just basic fundamental stuff. He didn't keep his hands vertical. He kept like kind of coming down on the player that was attacking him. But on the offensive end, you're right. One of the things that gets tricky is if he can come set a ball screen and then roll hard to the rim and catch lobs, then he's a real threat. But if you can't bring him into a ball screen because he's got Tatum on him and they're switching, then suddenly he's just standing in the dunker spot. And they're going to have to find some ways to counter that. I think an easy one is to just incorporate him in the action. There are ways to run ball screens with 3 players. So I would have Lively set the screen, and then as soon as they switch, I would just back screen for Lively and try to see if you can get him cutting downhill that way. They're going to have to find ways to get those bigs moving towards the rim, because if they're just standing there in the dunker spot, they're not getting enough offensive rebounds. They're not cleaning up enough lobs underneath the basket. They're not getting enough offensively out of that position. You saw a little bit in this game too, where they just went to Kleba because Kleba can shoot. Right. And so they go to Kleba at the 5, so at least they can space the floor a little bit. Maybe that's the direction this goes. If they can't figure out how to use Lively and Gafford, then they have to lean into Kleba and play small. That would be a really big issue, because now you're taking one of the foundational parts of Dallas's offense, which is their rim running bigs and their lob game, and you're just sidelining it, right? So it's tricky, but again, this is what Boston does to you. This is why it's such a tough matchup, and like it's super fascinating to me, because this has been kind of the theme of this playoff run, is like how different teams match up with each other. And Boston is uniquely equipped because of Tatum to neutralize the lob game. And then on the other end of the floor, they're uniquely equipped to attack the weak points in Dallas's offense. Defense. How many times tonight did you see Tatum or like Luka end up on a switch on one of the guys, and then the Boston player would just drive right around Luka and then bring another guy in and pass wide open 3? Like, that's an issue. Like in the last round, when Luka would get switched on to Anthony Edwards, he'd have an easy job. Like, just play up on him, because if he beats you off the dribble, no one's scared to go bare. So Lively and Gafford are just waiting underneath the basket to help you on the backside. That's not how it's going to be in this series. Luka's going to have to contain the basketball. It's going to be a challenge for him. And so I'm really, really fascinated to see how the matchups kind of shake out. I will say this, and I want to kick it to you just kind of moving forward in the series. There were a lot of things that went Boston's way tonight. They came out hair on fire, shot extremely well. Dallas shot very poorly. Luka and Kyrie both really struggled for the most part. I thought Luka put up his points, but he always does. But like I thought in the key portions of the game, he struggled. And so there is a very good chance that in game 2, Boston doesn't shoot as well, and that Dallas shoots better, and that Kyrie and Luka play better. So I think game 2 is going to be a really close game, and I think it's going to come down to crunch time, and I think it's going to be one of the first pivot points of the series. Do you agree?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is going to be an offensive series. I just, again, the NBA would prefer you don't have 4 or 5 veteran offensive pieces. Like, think about this. Tatum's a 1. Porzingis on bad teams is a 1 or a 1A. Jaylen Brown on lesser teams is a 1 or a 1A. Derek White's a 2 on lesser teams. And if you look at Drew Holiday, when Chris Middleton was hurt, he was a 2 last year for Milwaukee. Okay, that's like 5 guys that could be a 2 or a 1. We may not see a lot of that. Even if on a Denver, Gordon's really an energy defensive guy who can score, but you don't view him in that role. I like KCP. He's not a 2 on any team in the league, even the bad teams. So you get to a point with Boston where I'm like, the league is trying to avoid that. They like the OKC model, get draft picks, build, develop. Just that's what the NBA wants. They don't want you to go and cherry pick people. I think the NBA loves the Knicks. If you have to move a Randall to get a Paul George, whatever, that's fine. But they don't want this accumulation of like 5 guys. Like, I watched tonight and I thought, Dallas played old Clippers, figured it out quickly. Young OKC, I didn't pick them to win. Good series, but Oklahoma City's got a little Boston in it. They can spread you out. They're difficult.
They're young Boston.
Not as refined Boston. And I start watching this tonight, and I'm like, you got to kind of pick your poison with Boston. You really do. Like, I kept saying Indiana's so terrible defensively. Yeah, but Boston's really good offensively.
Yes.
And you're just like, come on, you got 5 guys that could be a 2. I mean, I don't think if you're a casual, people don't understand how good Derek White is. He's like all NBA defense. He's long, he's smart, he can shoot. His plus minus, his net rating. It's like, I think Dallas is going to have their hands full. I just think you got to a little bit when you play Boston, you got to cross your fingers a little. I mean, tonight, Tatum wasn't scoring a lot. Porzingis was unstoppable. I don't want to overreact, but God, when's the last? I mean, Boston has just rolled through the league since October. I mean, at some point, how many times have I seen them win by like 22 this year? I don't want to overreact, but it's like when Porzingis is hitting, okay, I'm kind of screwed a little bit. There's matchup issues everywhere.
No, you're absolutely hanging on and hoping that one, they miss shots, and two, they play stupid basketball. Like you're actively hoping,
which
that
they did for about 3 minutes in the third quarter.
Yeah, they did to start the third quarter, and then we got to the timeout. And like to that point, like that's what's kind of fascinating. Like I don't think anybody disagrees that Boston's ceiling is higher than everybody's. Yes. It was always just about their kind of like maturity and their ability to consistently reach that ceiling. What you brought up, I think, is really fascinating, and I've been thinking about this a lot over the course of the last week. Anybody could have traded for Porzingis. Yeah. Anybody could have traded for Jrue Holiday
or Kyrie.
Boston or Kyrie. Boston already had the most talented roster in the league last year. That was something I said consistently. Now they didn't live up to that potential, but like they were all Derek White, Jayson Tatum, Jaylen Brown, Al Horford, and Marcus Smart. That was already, in my opinion, an incredible top five. And Brad Stevens looked at this and was like, nope, not enough. And what's crazy here is like, if they end up hoisting the trophy, which you and I both believe they will, like, I think a good portion of the credit has to go to Brad Stevens for basically being like, I've got a couple of flawed stars. These guys need a ton of support. Obviously, we're about to head into the CBA. We're going to have all these new restrictions. Let's put it all in this year and let's see if we can make a little bit of a run. And like that's the thing. Like Boston outbid everybody for Kristaps. They outbid everybody for Jrue Holiday. And I can't help but think about your kind of overarching philosophy, which is like teams that take risks, they're the ones that usually end up at the end of the day with the trophy.
I mean, if you can go to the trade deadline, the Kyrie move, those are big swings. Those are big swings by Dallas. And, Porzingis, basketball is really interesting because it's the players come into the league much younger and generally much less mature. And so if you get into the wrong team or the wrong spot, you can get kind of a bad reputation. Porzingis' reputation, I mean, his game's different now. He's much more perimeter than early when he would pound the ball. And so Porzingis got a reputation like bad guy, bad locker room guy. All right, then he goes to Washington and he gets a fresh start. He moves outside, shoots more, less pounding the ball. The league becomes more analytic. People can show him real data. And you're like, oh, okay, that's a little bit of the unicorn. And then Boston, Brad Stevens seizes on it and says, you know what, with our really good room, he doesn't have to be a one or a two here. He can on nights. And so I think sometimes in the NFL, if you come into the league at 23 and by 26, you're kind of an idiot. Like you just can't figure stuff out. I'm kind of done with you. You got to be careful in the NBA. Basketball is a very individual culture. AAU, it's sort of about getting yours, showing off, letting the world see how much talent you have. If you get a bad opening locker room, Washington for 20 years, you get labeled, bad guy, doesn't compete. Because an NBA locker room is so small, a really talented guy that's distracted can really ruin a locker room. Hell, in baseball, if you're a schmuck and you go to the bullpen, you don't even sit in the dugout. Like in football, you splinter off at halftime or at practice with your unit. So I think like Kyrie's reputation earned. Dallas took a shot. AD, when he was in New Orleans, it was like dad bod, lazy, doesn't want to play hurt. I thought he was sensational the last year and a half. So these NBA guys, if you just make a judgment based on their first 3 years, you can leave a lot of stuff on the editing room floor. Like you can't watch Porzingis tonight. It's almost a revelation. It's like, oh, this is exactly what he was. This is what people thought he would be. He was the pre-Wemby, pre-Holmgren. This is what people said. You can't stop him. So, and I guess back to your initial point is that these two GMs took big swings on guys. Now, Porzingis was thought of as a bad locker room guy. That was his rep 4 years in the league. Well, he hasn't affected this locker room at all. I mean, you can see the way the Celtic players treat him. They like him. You know what I mean? And it's just part of their kind of unified effort. So basketball, football cultures are very different. There's a lot of things about the football culture I like, but you have to be you can't be as judgmental in basketball. You're getting 19-year-old kids. Jesus. The difference between 19 and 24 as a human being, once you get into your 41 to 47 is the same guy. 19 to 23, I got a lot of kids. It's a different human. And Porzingis now is like team guy. I mean, engaged defensively guy, cheering on teammate guy. So Brad Stevens saw that. And Brad knows it because he was a college coach. He sees these guys mature. He knows they change. It's my take.
Yeah, there's quite literally been zero complaint about
Zero.
Porzingis in the entire experience in Boston. It's funny. I went on with Grant Paulson in DC on radio earlier today, and he asked me just some questions about the Wizards going into the offseason. And I one of the big things I kind of feel passionately about is this specific thing you're bringing up, which is I feel like a lot of people are out on Jordan Poole right now. And it's like he's young. And then he won a championship when he was really young. So, of course, it went to his head. He got a little bit off the rails over the following couple of seasons. I have a feeling that Jordan Poole, when he's 27, is going to be a really good basketball player. You know what I mean? And to your point, it's like before I did this for a living, I worked in real estate and I was on the investment side, and you just completely change the way you look at homes more towards what they could be rather than what they are. And I think that's a really interesting kind of like approach for GMs, especially in these big market teams that are typically operating above the cap, because from there, you're not going to get a top 7 draft pick, right? So like, how do you find talent beyond that? And like a big one is look for guys who were in the lottery that failed at previous destinations, because they were in the lottery because they were viewed to have exceptional baseline talent, right? But they failed in those original destinations because of any number of factors: immaturity, circumstance, leadership, anything, right? Even an injury potentially, right? And that's the thing, is like those are the guys that you can kind of find real opportunity. I feel like Rui Hachimura was that for the Lakers, a guy kind of in a bad organization in Washington, and then they find a role for him in LA, and suddenly it works. Like these PJ Washington playing for a terrible Charlotte Hornets team. It's like, let's bring you into this winning circumstance and give you a job that is more suited to your talents, and let's see what you can do. And so in general, I think it's really fascinating how these above the cap teams have to kind of look for the investment type of NBA players that kind of more fit within their specific scheme.
Well, think about a lot of the guys that come in and they're mature. A lot of them have stayed in Villanova guys. Okay, because they're 3-star guys. So they stay in college, they're hard coached, they come in more mature. But a lot of the AAU stars and the G League guys, their NBA coach is their first real grown-up. Like the kid that Houston got, is it Jalen Green? Like when you first watched him, you're like, he got a lot of talent, but he's all over the place. He didn't know how to play basketball. And then in year 2, you're like, oh, he's being coached. Like he's off ball. He can actually help the team. Well, what would he know? It's like you don't know what you don't know. So I think a lot of when you watch these teams that do the little things well, the Knicks, they have a lot of guys that played a lot of college basketball. So they're just like, they're 27 going on 34. And then you get these guys that are super talented, lottery picks, one and done. At 27, they're 23. Like they just haven't been coached. They haven't had an Izzo. They haven't had a Jay Wright. And that, I always said, that's the value of college coaching and now there's NIL. I think there's value in saying, I want to stay for a sophomore year of college in a really good program. Somebody is really on my ass and I can make decent money here. I can make it at the G League. And you're part of something. If you're part of Villanova or Kansas, you're really part of a community. You're part of a campus. And that's different people, different races, religions, different classes. It's hard. It's challenging. And so I think I just think the NBA is different. You have to be careful about labeling and judging. Now, there are players like D'Angelo Russell. This is what he is, right? Like, it's been established. Okay. I'm done trying to figure out the Rubik's Cube. Like, this is what he is. But I think Porzingis is, God, it was almost tonight watching him play. Like, he had that kind of that devilish grin a couple of times. Like, you guys.
Oh yeah, he had the smile
Like,
going.
you guys aren't stopping me.
He's like, I'm good at this.
Yeah, and it's that's basketball. You could do it. There are times when you get hot and you have size advantages and matchup advantages. I think game 2 will be really close and really, really competitive. I think it will be I think Dallas will come out and play much better I mean, if I'm Dallas, my takeaway is we got to get physical. We got to put bodies on people. We have got to, and I think the officials tend to. I don't think they favor teams. I think they favor even. They're going to give Dallas some physicality in game 2. They're going to allow Dallas to be physical. The officials will do that. Now, by the way, Boston will be allowed to be physical too. Will they take advantage of it? But I think my take is if I was a coach of Dallas, I'd be like, guys, we've got to win possessions on the defensive end. We may not match up offensively. We have to win the defensive end. We have to move the ball better. We had very few assists early. We've got to win in the defensive end. I think game 2 will be a different, it'll look like a different basketball game. That's my guess.
No, I 100% agree. And you bring that physicality, you take an early lead, you add pressure to Boston, which changes the free feeling that you have when you shoot the basketball. Maybe they have a lesser shooting night and you give yourself a chance to win. Before we get out of here, I wanted to ask you about Dan Hurley. Sure. So I obviously, as someone who roots for the Lakers, I actually was very excited about this today. But what was your kind of takeaway from that big reveal this morning?
Well, I saw it at like 4:35, a Woj bomb starting my day. And my take was, I said, because I founded the volume, so I tend to look at things from a managerial position. And so I said, if I was Rob Pelinka and Jeannie Buss, and Minnesota's got Ant, and OKC's got Chet and SGA. And then there's Luka's 25. And you start looking up and down, and Jokic is still in his prime.
29.
Boston's 2 guys are in their prime. And you start looking around at San Antonio and Houston this year, I think will pop. Like, will be different teams. And you start looking around and thinking, listen, man, we got to start drafting and developing here. Like, this is what the league, if you start looking at the second apron, what the CBA is in the NBA, we're not going to get a third huge star here with LeBron and AD. This is not going to work. So we have got to draft and develop. And so you can't watch these playoffs and not come to this conclusion. The NBA has pivoted to young stars. KD, LeBron, Steph, it's over. Like, they're not running the league anymore. Like, Tatum now is one of the veterans. And I think my takeaway is, okay, who does that? Who drafts? Who builds culture? Who's tough? It wasn't a pivot away from LeBron. It was a pivot toward the league. The league now is a draft and develop league. These players are going to get rich, but the league watched what Golden State did with KD, and they didn't like it. And the owners didn't like it, and the league didn't like it. I can remember talking to fans of the NBA being like, I hate this. This is just not fair. And I think the league heard that. Adam Silver did not like that move at all. And so I think the Lakers, Rob and Jeannie, look at this and think, there's a change. We don't want to be the Clippers, old, dysfunctional, one guy, Terrence Mann, that feels like he's young. It's a lot of names and great on the marquee. It's a great movie poster. It's not really a championship team. And I think the Lakers don't feel like it. And, that's my takeaway is they're looking at this and stepping back and going, we like JJ Redick, but he has no history in drafting and developing. This is not what he does. By the way, there's Connecticut players in this draft. And also Hurley the last 3 years, he's recruited almost probably every good domestic player in the first round. He's recruited or seen them. So I think they're going to be active. And that was my take is you can't watch these playoffs and not see this gigantic pivot. It's like when Manning, Brady, and Big Ben got old, and you're watching Mahomes and Lamar and Allen. It's like, oh shit, we got ourselves a new league. As soon as Tom leaves, we got a new league. It's a brand new league. And that was my take on it. Yours?
Yeah, so there were three reasons that I was excited about it. The first one is exactly what you said, the draft and development piece. I think a big part of it too, like you mentioned, with the cap rules changing, it's going to be really difficult to have more than two
Almost
stars.
impossible.
And
Yeah.
exactly. And I think he specifically is going to excel at finding role players that are great connective pieces next to stars, because the Laker brand is going to continue to bring in star
Yeah.
talent in one way or another, whether it's through the trade market, whether it's through free agency. They're going to get stars. But because of the new rules, you're not going to get three of them. So you're probably going to have two, and it's going to be about working on the margins and finding discounted, valuable players, which I think is something that he's going to excel with. The second two pieces of it. One, he's an offensive genius, like literally an offensive genius. And specifically, what I find fascinating is he was capable of generating space for his offense with multiple non-shooters on the floor, which I think is super fascinating on a Laker team that has an Anthony Davis that can struggle to shoot the basketball, that is going to probably play a Jared Vanderbilt that struggles to shoot the basketball. And he has all these interesting concepts. Like, he's really good at disguising his sets. He's a big believer in weak side action, which basically occupies help defenders by making them think about what they're doing on the weak side while your stars are running ball screens on the other side. He's super creative as a tactician, especially on the offensive end of the floor, which I think is going to work wonders for a Laker offense that can get stagnant sometimes. And then the third piece of it is he's just a psycho. Yeah. He's a psycho. He's competitive. And then I think he's going to bring enough cachet, because that's the fear, right? Like, if you're going to play devil's advocate, you're like David Blatt. Comes over, championship coach from Europe. LeBron scoffs at him and says, I want the assistant instead, right? So, like, that's what you're scared of. But I actually think LeBron has a lot more respect for Dan Hurley. I mean, especially seeing as he's been kind of like watching as a fan as he's had his success over the last couple of years. I think he'll have some success there. And then I complained at you nonstop this season about Darvin Ham not holding players accountable, and them becoming a team that was really sloppy for stretches because they didn't value individual possessions. They weren't good at attention to detail. That will not fly under Dan Hurley. He will be on those guys, and I think it'll help.
Well, I try to defend Darvin Ham, but he is a defensive-minded coach, and you see this in the NFL. Offense comes easier. The attention to detail from offensive coaches is better. So, like, when you watch offensive, like Steve Kerr, like when they mic Steve Kerr, he picks on stuff up so quickly. Like I'm not seeing it. I'm watching the game. He is a possession to possession coach, Steve Kerr. He watches every little mistake. Mark Jackson, defensive coach. I always viewed him as more of a defensive coach. The offense could never quite get in sync. Now, Mark did a good job on the defensive end, but I thought with Darvin Ham is he could get players. I thought Anthony Davis was absolutely sensational defensively this year. I thought he was the defensive player of the year, but his offense was inconsistent. Darvin's not going to help you a lot there. Darvin was a very limited offensive player. And so I think just like in football, I think coaches have, Vogel's good with bigs. D'Antoni's doesn't like bigs. Coaches all have strengths and weaknesses. And Darvin, I thought, was not as detailed offensively, allowed sloppy possessions, didn't hold players offensively accountable. They'll make it up on the defensive end. That's not the league. That's just not the league. You're gonna shoot your way. I mean, you start looking at teams. Dallas was a better offensive team than Minnesota. They won the series. It's it is as hard as New York played. You start look. Indiana was more consistently a higher tempo, healthier, better offensive team. With them, offense is winning these series. Like, effort's great, but like that's why Boston's favored in this series. They got 5-6 guys that can score 20, and so I think Darvin doesn't necessarily fit what's happening to the league, which is increasingly skilled, increasingly unstoppable for players of size. And I think Hurley's good with that. He understands what the sport is becoming. That you play hard, play with urgency, get the details down offensively. Don't give up sloppy possessions. Lakers would have bad quarters offensively. There are times, if you didn't have LeBron on the floor and Austin Reeves was in foul trouble, you were done. They just were a bad offensive unit. So, Yeah, I think to your point is I tried to defend Darvin Ham, but I'm seeing some of the same stuff in the NFL where the skill now in the NBA is just too damn good. It's just too good. There's just, if you're not equipped offensively, possession after possession, you'll just get run out of this sport really quickly.
Oh, for sure. Like, look at this particular matchup here for Dallas versus Boston. Like a big part, you mentioned it at the start of the show, like the stagnation, the lack of the ball and player movement, the Luka Kyrie kind of your turn, my turn stuff. That is, it works for Dallas because Luka is so damn good and he might be the best player in the world. But like, I do believe there's a reason why the league has shifted towards more ball and player movement. That's why we're seeing teams like Denver succeed and Golden State succeed. Golden State kind of really revolutionized 5-out offense and brought it to where it is today. And like, I think Dan Hurley is in touch with what works in modern basketball, which I think is going to help a ton. I think he understands the complications of the transition to the NBA, which I think will be probably his biggest challenge, but he knows he's going to have to talk differently to professional athletes than to college players. He knows that there's going to be more, media pressure with that LA job on a day-to-day basis. Like we talked about Darvin Ham all the time this season, because it's like, that's, if you were ranking high pressure coaching jobs in America, Lakers head coach is pretty high up on that list, especially when LeBron James is on the roster. And so I think he's up for it. I think he can do it.
One of the things I've talked about today kind of ad nauseum on my show is I said the Lakers had 20 years in the second biggest city in the country with no NFL teams. And the NFL eventually gobbles up every city. And now you've got Harbaugh and Herbert and McVay and Stafford and the second richest owner in Stan Kroenke. And the Dodgers look like they're a 110-win team. Here comes USC to the Big Ten. Ballmer's got a new arena. The key in this is, are you okay now being the third biggest story in LA, fourth on some weekends? Like, because this city has got star coaches and star teams and star players. And it could be, Wagner, Rhode Island, UConn. He had a losing record each year. He's a culture guy. He's an oven guy. He's not a microwave guy. It's none of this fake bullshit. Like this is going to be a slow roast. Okay. And LeBron and Anthony Davis, if he signs a 5-year, $60 million deal, the Lakers, Jeannie Buss doesn't have the financial wherewithal. She's not Ballmer. That's not a rounding error for her. So it is a real commitment. So I think everybody's just got to take a deep breath. The Lakers had this LA, they were winning titles with no NFL team. The Dodgers were good, but not winning World Series. They owned the city for 20 years. And they got real used to leaking stuff to the media on a slow and just stealing thunder. Well, if you're 38 and 44 in this city next year, and Herbert and Harbaugh, and here come the Clippers in their new arena, you're going to be the fourth story really quickly. So I think that's the key to me. It's not Hurley. It says the organization ready to take a deep breath, make tough decisions, get a little younger, give up some players, get some draft picks. I think they'll be fine. Dan's intense. Spoelstra's way more. I mean, Steve Kerr's intense. Ty Lue's intense.
The good ones are.
I mean, D'Antoni's not. Mike Malone in Denver. He's like a fist fight waiting to happen.
Popovich.
I'm okay with intense. I think players respect it. I think you can get run over very quickly in this league. I think this is a moment in time where LeBron's probably got 2 years left, maybe 3. LeBron knows, like, this is no longer like running through him. I think he knows it. I think he understands his value, merchandising, tickets, production. He sees his value, but LeBron knows. This isn't Mahomes in his prime. This is not what this is anymore. This is not the bubble year. This is not Cleveland or Miami. This is a different time. So I'm excited for it. Plus, it's just, let's be honest, it's interesting. That's a big swing. That's interesting.
It's super interesting.
Yeah.
To your point, if they have another stretch like they did post the late Jerry Buss passing away, where they suck for a decade, like that could cost them.
But they had
their whole.
They didn't have a direction then. Hurley will guarantee you a direction.
Exactly. That's my point. Is like, I like that type of aggression because he's the kind of guy that can establish a culture that lasts. And one of the other things too, as far as like the money goes, I think it's crazy how all the hand-wringing about the amount of money these coaches are making. Like, if you had to pay Dan $15 million a year, like, what is that in the grand scheme of the salary cap? What is that in the grand scheme of this new media rights deal? What
the
is
league's
that in
making
the grand scheme of all of
$7.5 billion a year. Like, who cares? Another thing is, you have to empower a coach. You can't pay your coach $5 and your seventh guy is making $28 million a year. You just can't do that. You have to empower these guys. So I've said it. I would pay him $12 million a year, 12 and a half. His wife's a Jersey girl. He runs the best program in college. I like the new NBA. I like the European players. I like the mobility is one of those, like small ball. Small ball's a lot of nonsense. It was the Warriors. Mobility, it worked with LeBron and KD for 3 years. Like, the truth is, most of this league, most of the stories, Boston figured it out with KG, but Pierce was a Celtic. And by and large, mobility, it hasn't worked for KD. It worked for 3 years. LeBron made it work everywhere. So this is the league. Embrace it. Go get the guy who does it better than anybody in college. And by the way, he does it with big personalities. It's the Northeast. He takes 5-star guys. He takes 3-star guys. Like, UConn's a big program. High expectations. They get high-profile players, high-profile transfers. They're going to be favored to win another national championship. So it's not like he's dealing with a bunch of 2-star guys that he runs over. These are great players.
These are guys with egos. Yeah. We just need to get you on a Zoom call with the Hurley family so you can sell them on how great Los Angeles is. And then we can get you to close the deal. All right, Colin, this was fun. I'm looking forward to game 2. This NBA Finals Game 1 instant reaction was brought to you by Chase Freedom Unlimited. Unlimited 1.5% cash back is just the beginning. Cash back 3% on dining, including takeout, 3% at drugstores, 5% on Chase travel, and 1.5% on everything else. How do you cash back? All right, guys, that is all we have for tonight. I will have a film session at some point up on the YouTube channel tomorrow. As always, I appreciate you guys, and we will see you again live after game 2 on Sunday.